Today I'm going to be going through and building my custom rig for my Sony A7S Mark III. If you don't own the A7S III but you have the FX3 or the A7 Mark IV, then you can still use this setup, but when it comes to the A7 IV there is a slight alteration, but I'll point that out when we get to it. The setup you're going to be seeing me build may be slightly different to what you've seen elsewhere on YouTube or elsewhere on the internet, and there's a few reasons for that, so I will be going through my thought process for each individual part. So obviously to begin with, we're going to need a camera body. As mentioned, I'm going to be using the Sony A7S Mark III. This has been my go-to camera for the last year or so. Regardless of when it comes to photos or video, it's amazing when it comes to video, as we already know. But with the rig I'm going to be making, you're going to be able to supercharge this that little bit extra to get every ounce of power out of it and make it a little bit more ergonomic. Even this camera body alone can record up to 4K, 120 frames a second in 10-bit color, but we want to squeeze as much out of it as possible. When we're recording internally, we're going to be using pro-grade V90 SD cards. These are 128 gigabytes each. You can have two of these in the camera at the same time and record simultaneously onto both. The only drawback to using V90 SD cards is that you can't use S&Q mode in the all-intro codec. If I'm honest, I haven't ever used the all-intro codec on this camera. It may be a lot better than just using the XAVC-S codec. And if I'm honest, I'm just really interested to see how much better it is over the standard codec. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing a test, A/B-ing them, along with H.265 codec. So if you want to see that video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. So obviously to go with a camera you need a lens, so I use the Sony FE24-70 f2.8 G Master. It's still the version 1, it's not the version 2. If I had the version 2, obviously I would use that over this. This one's pretty battered and bruised now, but it's still a workhorse, and when it comes to anything which I'm not really sure what I'm going to be filming, I may have to change focal length a lot. This is the lens I use. Obviously for the projects where I have a little bit more time to do the filming, then I would use primes such as a 35 and an 85, but for the most part this does everything I need. And you may have noticed on the top and in recent videos that I've done that there is a filter attached to this lens. It's the Polar Pro Mist filter. It's something that I've added over the last 2 months and I use it pretty much all the time. I'm using one on this lens right now, what you're seeing through. And as I've mentioned in recent videos, it kind of just gives it a look that I personally really like, but you can take it off if you wish and just put a UV filter on to protect your lens. Alongside the Polar Pro Mist filter, and because we're going to be shooting analog in a higher ISO than we normally would, then we're going to need a variable ND filter. So I use the Polar Pro and Peter McKinnon 2 to 5 stop variable ND. So now with all the boring camera stuff out of the way, the lenses and all that, let's move into actually building the rig. So when it comes to the rest of the stuff that I'm going to be going through in this video, it's pretty much all Small Rig, and there's a reason for it. The video isn't sponsored by Small Rig or anything. I have literally gone out and bought all this stuff, but it's because it works so well. So first up we have the cage. This is for the Sony A7S Mark III. Having a cage for your camera is really useful because you can mount many things to it. On a normal camera you can only really mount something to the bottom or to the top in the hot shoe mount, and obviously you don't want to put loads of weight onto your hot shoe mount because that's fairly important in the camera world. But once it's in a cage you have all these holes around it where you can screw things in. They're all different sizes so they fit different accessories, and on top of all of that it just protects your camera from any knocks from the side, the bottom or the top. Two things I really like about this Small Rig cage is the fact that it's really ergonomic on the side. When you put it on, this doesn't stick out. It's not like a funny angle where that your hand will go around the grip. And the best thing about Small Rig, and the reason I use it so much in this rig, is because the tools come with it and they're all magnetic. So next up we're going to be mounting a base plate to the bottom. This is from the DJI Ronin. I attach this directly to the bottom of the cage. It allows me to use the camera with just the cage on straight onto my DJI Ronin. The DJI Ronin is not something I use more often. This is more of a handheld rig, and I'm getting much more into using a handheld system over using a Ronin. Ronins definitely have their place still. There's nothing wrong with using them, but I just love the handheld look at the moment. So next up we are talking top handles. This is the one thing which I really struggled to decide what I wanted. There's quite a few different top handles out there which you can buy, but the one I decided to go for was this one. I don't know the name of it, but I'll leave the actual code where you can pick it up just here. And the reason I went for this one over the others is because you can screw this straight into the top of the cage. It's got 2 locating pins so the handle won't spin around, but because it's only 1 screw to hold it onto the cage, it's fairly quick release, but it's still secure. And that was the way I designed this whole rig. I wanted everything to be fairly quick release, so if the situation changes, I can adapt to it. So I actually attach the top handle, maybe the wrong way round to what it should be. It probably should be this way, but it's because the lens and everything else is across the front of the camera rather than the back. So if I was to have it this way, it would be really, really front heavy. But it's only a minor thing. Obviously you can build these to be however you want, and this is the way that I wanted it. A little later on down the line, after I'd started using this, I did decide to add a second handle to this, and this goes onto the left-hand side of the camera. This attaches by a NATO rail straight up the side, so you don't actually have to screw it in. And once again, it's fairly quick release. The reason I went for this one over all the others is because you can rotate it just by holding down your thumb, and you can rotate it to any position you want, let go, and it locks into place. So therefore you can go from holding the camera like this and then dropping it down really, really comfortably and holding it just by the top handle and supporting it using this handle. There are some people out there who add a handle to the right hand side of the camera. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but for myself, I don't really understand the logic behind it, because you have all your controls on your camera, which you still need to change whilst you're shooting. And if you've got a handle there, then you're gonna have to kind of work around it like this, and it's just not for me. There's nothing wrong with having it like this. The lens is still in the middle, and it just seems really natural for me to do. A couple other reasons I went for this one over the others is because it has a cold shoe mount in the top, which is really useful if you want to add any extra accessories, such as microphones on top. And then once again, you have an Allen key in the bottom, which is completely magnetic, so you can use that to take off or add any accessories to your rig should you need it. Next up, we're going to go for a hinge monitor mount. This is just with a cold shoe adapter, so you can go straight on the front of the handle and tighten up, and then you can use the tool which comes in the top of the handle to be able to tighten that up so it's not going to come loose. So moving on to the monitor, and the reason we want to add a monitor is to squeeze as much juice out of the Sony A7S III as possible, and that is with the Atomos Ninja 5. This allows you to capture raw footage directly from the HDMI of the Sony A7S III and pretty much give you the best quality that you can get out of this camera. Now, there are only certain times I use ProRes RAW on this. It's definitely not all the time because it does take up a lot of storage space. But there have been recent projects where I've wanted to spend a little bit more time making sure I got the most out of the camera, making sure I got it perfect as possible in camera, but give me enough flexibility in post should I need it. And that is where this comes in. I feel like I've only scraped the tip of the iceberg when it comes to using the Atomos Ninja 5 with the Sony A7S III. I'm really interested to see what you can achieve with these two paired up, and anything I find will be shared on this channel. So if you want to see all of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Now, if you're using the Sony A7 IV, then I wouldn't recommend getting the Atomos Ninja 5 because the A7 IV can't output raw video. But I would highly recommend getting a monitor for certain projects, because having false color and just being able to see your image a lot clearer on the screen, it allows you to pick out certain details. The framing is much nicer, and let's be honest, the little monitor on the back of any of the cameras these days, it's just not the best. So if you're using the Sony A7 IV, I'd recommend getting something like the Atomos Shinobi, because it'll give you all the capabilities of what this can, but without the recording, which obviously you don't need. As mentioned, when you're recording in ProRes RAW, you take up a lot of storage space very, very quickly. So with my Atomos Ninja 5, I decided to get a Samsung 2TB SSD drive, which goes into the back of the Ninja 5. This gives me a fair amount of recording time for projects, and if I was to ever get close to filling it, you just offload it onto your laptop. But like I said, you need a lot of storage space if you're gonna start recording in ProRes RAW, and that's why I don't all of the time. So obviously, to connect the Atomos Ninja 5 to the Sony A7S III, I'm gonna need a HDMI cable. So I got these really small, thin, small rig cables. This is probably about 50 centimeters long, and it's the perfect length to go from the Atomos Ninja 5 down the top handle round to the HDMI port on the Sony A7S III. Obviously, I decided to go for the smaller ones over the thicker ones because obviously it's more flexible and the less chance of you pulling it and getting it damaged. And overall, they're fairly inexpensive. I think this cost me around £9 for the 50 centimeter one. But having a thin cable means that you can't really feel it. It doesn't look too bulky or anything in comparison to HDMI cables like you'd have for your TV, but it still transfers all the data from the A7S III through to the Ninja 5 perfectly fine. And there's one thing I've missed out, which I know full well someone will pull me up on if I don't include it, and that's sound. When it comes to using a handheld rig, it's very rare that I actually do capture any audio straight into the camera. There's a few reasons for that, but to keep it short, I can't boom a microphone into the scene. So unless I'm using an on-camera microphone, which most of the time won't sound that good, I'd have to use a lapel mic. But for most of the stuff that I do, I actually don't need a lapel mic. I normally use sound design afterwards or capture some audio on the day just to try and make things work. It's definitely not the best way to do things, and ideally you should have a proper microphone on the camera if you're wanting to get really nice audio. But once again, it comes down to what you need from the camera and what kind of projects you're working on. And with that said, so no one can pull me up, back to the video. Now there's one last thing we need to add to this rig to be able to get it all working, and that's a power supply for the Atomos Ninja 5. There's a few different ways you can do this, but I just go for an NPF battery. This is an NPF 960, which you can plug straight into the back of the Atomos Ninja 5. Now it is a fairly big battery to have on the Atomos Ninja 5, and you can get smaller ones, but one alternative option would be to detap it, so to actually power it from a second battery somewhere on the rig. Now this is one of the two things that I've missed out on the rig, and that is a V-mount battery. It may be something I add later on down the line, but it's not something I need at this moment in time. What you could do is add a V-mount battery to the back of the camera, and then you could actually power the camera and the Atomos Ninja 5 from the same power supply. V-mount batteries have a lot of power in them, and you could actually probably run this rig for a lot longer than what this battery and the internal battery of the A7S III could. But for the amount of times, and especially the recording length that I actually need the Ninja 5 to be working alongside the A7S III, this battery will do me perfectly fine. But obviously to add a V-mount battery to the back of this, you will also need to add rails to it. And at this moment in time, as mentioned, it's not something I need to do either. The second thing you may point out, which is something which everyone on YouTube seems to always do to the rig to begin with, is add a matte box to it. And as you can see, I don't have a matte box, and nor do I actually want one. Matte boxes definitely have their uses, they definitely have their place within the filming world. And then once again, you would either have to attach rails, or if you want, you can attach it directly to the front of the lens, which is something I didn't want to do because I'm using variable ND filters, which I already own, and this does me perfectly fine for the kind of stuff that I do, but you guys may be different. The links to everything I've mentioned in this video is down in the description box below. If you have any questions about anything I've mentioned in this video, if you want to share what you've got in your camera rig, let me know down in the comment section below. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more content like this, then hit the subscribe button. And if you do, I'll see you right there. Thank you very much for watching.